Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today, we are going to be talking about a subject that I actually end up talking to people about a fair bit, and that I think that there's some misconceptions on, particularly in the way that people view it and think about it. And there's a lot of assumptions that are made that don't necessarily end up always being true. So we're going to talk about new boats versus used boats. So if you're in the boat market looking to get a boat, are you better off to buy a new boat or are you better off to buy a used boat? So we're going to run through them because there's a lot of things you probably think about that you would expect in this discussion that is accurate, but there might be some other aspects that you're not aware of. And I know that there are certain areas that I will talk to people about, and they're really kind of shocked and surprised when they find out some of the information regarding whether or not they should be buying a new boat or a used boat, or if so, what kind of a used boat, or some different things like that. So let's dive into it and let's talk about this subject. As you may know, I run a company called Boardco. We sell Centurion and Supreme boats, and so I'm going to be focused primarily on the towboat market segment because that's the one I'm the most familiar with and know the most information about. And yes, I have a bias that's towards Centurion or Supreme just because I run a dealership that deals with them. We sell new boats. We also sell used boats, and there's a lot of stuff in here that I want to try and be as unbiased as I possibly can, or shoot straight down the middle, and not necessarily try and compel you to buy a new boat or buy a used boat or anything of that nature. I just want to give you the cold, hard facts about what the benefits and drawbacks are to each one of these. So, but keep in mind, we're talking about towboats in this segment. If you're looking at like a fishing boat or a jet drive or something like that, it may apply in this scenario, but there might be certain aspects that may not necessarily be applicable. So, diving in. So, let's talk about, I'm going to kind of split this into two different sections. I'm going to talk about new boats and what the benefit would be of buying a new boat. And I'm going to talk about used boats and what the benefit would be in a used boat. So when we start talking about new, the benefits that you end up having with new boats are, the first thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that you know what you are getting. Now, in certain situations, buying a used boat can be a great option if you are familiar with the boat, if you know about it, if it's gone through a thorough inspection, if it's certified in any way, shape, or form. Like we do a certification process at Boardco where we run through any boats that we bring in on trade or that we have available for sale. But just buying it from a private party or somebody that you don't know, there's a lot of aspects if you don't know what you don't know. And when it comes to new boats, the great thing is you pretty much know what you're getting. It's coming straight off the factory line. Everything should be working properly. It's been thoroughly vetted. But the other thing that's great is you also have the assurance on the backside of warranty coverage. And so if it doesn't necessarily, like if there's something in it that's not exactly perfect or not working properly, it'll typically handle in warranty coverage will be available. So, but the big thing that is a major benefit is that you know what you're getting when it comes to a new boat. So that part can be really important. Like I mentioned, if it's a used one that you are familiar with the owner, if you're familiar with the history of the boat, if you can get service records or things like that, that may be a helpful piece. But one thing that a lot of people may not be aware of is there's no such thing as like a Carfax on a boat. Now, tied into that, though, is that there's also a boat's a little different than a car, as in a car can have severe underlying issues from like being in a previous wreck or an accident or something. As long as a boat didn't have a significant amount of water that was brought on, like it was sunk or swamped or something, if there was body damage on a boat, that typically has no impact down the road. It's not indicative of future issues. It doesn't mean that it's going to have problems. If it has been sunk or swamped, then it will have significant problems, and that's something that can normally be determined if you do an inspection. But trying to verify what the history is on a boat can be very, very difficult, because not only are there's not a Carfax or something like that, there's no synchronization of service records. If it was serviced at multiple places or if it was owned by multiple owners, there's no way of verifying how many times that the title was transferred. In fact, a lot of states don't even title boats. So it can end up with some muddying of the water there. So that is something when we're talking about the difference between new and used that can be a really nice thing when we start talking about a new boat. The second thing that I mentioned that is exactly like, or what I had, something that is connected to what I mentioned previously is the idea that you have warranty coverage. So now I want to talk about this a little bit because this is a major advantage for new, but it is something that can be available on used boats, and I'll touch on that in just a second. But when we start talking about a new boat, most of the new boats nowadays, they come with 5-year warranty. There's always little nuances and caveats to that warranty coverage. It's not necessarily always 5 years on everything. As an example, almost all boats, if not all of them, have different warranty coverages for gel coat than they do for the rest of the boat. It's not 5 years, and there's got a bunch of asterisks attached. There's sometimes some hour limitations, but most of the time those are specifically built into the warranty coverage to deal with unique situations. So an example of that being they put an hour restriction on the boats that is quite high. Like on a lot of the new Centurion boats, the other boats from Nautique and other manufacturers as well, they'll have like 1,000-hour warranty coverage limit over 5 years. Well, if you're going to exceed that number, you're talking about putting over 200 hours a year on your boat, which is significantly more than most people will put on their boat. The average usage on a boat is about 75 hours a year. Now, how do you get to where you put over 200 a year? Most of the time, that's a commercial application. And so they put that limiting factor on there so they don't have boat rental companies or camps or schools or things that are just racking up like 900 hours a year on their boat, and then making it so that they have complete warranty coverage for multiple years, because that can be a major problem that the rest of you who are buying boats and not doing that would be subsidizing that use case and that warranty coverage. So they do things like that to cover unique situations. There's a lot of other applications dealing with salt water, with excessive abuse on the engine, improper use of the boat, just different things like that. So for the most part, warranty coverage covers the things that most people will experience and have go wrong, but there are just some small caveats to them. Now, when we start talking about used boat warranty, just so you're aware, there is no straight out certified used program that exists in the towboat space like there is in some automotive spaces. So like you might go and get a certified used Toyota car. That is going to be certified used from Toyota, from the factory, and be backed with some form of a factory warranty. That is not the case when we start talking about towboats. Any warranty coverage is available is via a third-party warranty coverage. Some of the times those can be great coverages. There's certain coverages that are available that are awesome. We do one from Boardco that works really well. There's other ones such as Brunswick that seem to do a really good job. But there's also some out there that are just not very good. And what'll happen is you'll pay for that warranty coverage, and then when you have an issue, you think it's covered under warranty, you take it in and they deny your claim. So you want to make sure that if you're going to get an outside third-party warranty, that it's from a reputable source, that is covered, that if you're buying a boat from a dealer, that it's going to be warranty coverage that they've had a lot of experience with and that they stand behind, and that they've had customers have a really good experience dealing with that warranty company and having stuff covered. For a long time, we actually didn't offer third-party warranty companies at Boardco, mainly just because we didn't want to offer something that was not up to snuff and not going to take care of people the right way. And it wasn't until we found one that seemed to do a great job from a coverage standpoint, that we vetted and tested thoroughly, that we were able to feel comfortable actually offering it to our clients to make it so that they had some peace of mind and coverage after the time that they buy their boat. So that's kind of that's the other piece that we're talking about, warranty coverage. Yes, it's available for use, but not all warranty coverages are created equal. Where on the new front, generally speaking, they're very similar. There's some very small nuances between different boat warranty coverages, but they all do a really good job, quite frankly. So that part is one of the other pieces that is a benefit on the new side for sure. Now, the next thing that I could talk about that it should become as no surprise is the technology. Now, when it comes to technology, there are advancements continually all the time when we're starting talking about these surf boats. They're advancing much more rapidly than what you typically see in like the automotive industry. And they're more in line with other high performance aspects, like some different power sport aspects and things, where they're upgrading and changing components, changing the systems and changing functionality. Particularly, one of the reasons for this is because we have now started, or towboat manufacturers have started adjusting and building and designing their boats more with the application of wake surfing in mind. So though other aspects or other different things like automotive, we're still doing the same thing with a car that we were doing 70 years ago. Now, there's some new aspects that come in if you're going to be in a more performance-driven aspect like racing circuit, or if you're doing stuff with off-road or things, that's a little bit different. But generally speaking, we're not using cars that much different than we were in the 1950s. They're going on a road, they're driving from point A to point B. On a boat, it's a little bit different. Yeah, it's designed to drive, and they haven't changed that much in that regard. What has changed is the focus around what the boats are designed to do, which in the case of towboats, primarily right now is around wake surfing. There's still a wakeboarding aspect and a water skiing aspect that comes into play, as well as just a general day boating and day cruising thing. But the technology specifically centered around wake surfing has changed a lot. I mean, just in the last few years alone, there's been significant advancements where the waves are notably more powerful, much more customizable. They're longer with more surfable area. They're easier to set up. There's a lot of new functionality and technology that exists. So that's something that is continually evolving, and it's not something that, like, if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to buy a 7-year-old used towboat and we want to get into wake surfing and it's going to surf the same way as a 2023 model boat. That's not the case. Can you tweak and dial in a 2015 or a 2016 and throw a great surf wave? Yes, but it doesn't really matter what you do to it. It's not going to be able to surf on the level of the new high performance 2023s. So there's a bit of a difference that you get there just from a technological standpoint and a performance standpoint. Now, there's also a technological standpoint that just deals with like the technology on the boats, the audio systems, the interface on the dash screens, other different aspects of that. That has certainly advanced, and for some people that can be a really important thing. For myself, I care a lot more on the performance end than I do on the other like tech whiz stuff. But you definitely have a lot more customization functionality, a lot better controls, a lot more ease of use now than you did just a number of years ago. So that's a big thing that you see, that there in some years there's very significant technological jumps, and in other years there's just slight differences. And so it just kind of depends on what years we're talking about and what we're looking at. But overall, you're talking about a big technology difference on new boats versus used boats. Now, next thing I want to talk about is just the fact that you have a boat that is going to be new. Now, this is pretty self-explanatory, but a boat is also a little bit different than like a car in some respects, especially on like the interiors, in that the boats are exposed to elements outdoors. A lot of boats are stored inside. A lot of them are not necessarily stored inside, but you've got water and you've got other different elements, and it shows wear and tear on it. In some cases, on interiors more so than a vehicle does. We're not using them nearly as much, so that is a factor as well. But you can get a boat that's in great shape, that's on the used end. But if you're looking to get a boat that has no cosmetic flaws, if you're really anal retentive and you want to have a boat that's just perfect, really the only way you can do that is new. Sometimes we have people who are looking for a boat that is essentially a brand new boat, but they're looking for it in a used with a used budget, and they just don't ever end up being able to find anything they really like. And the reason why is because trying to find a boat that is perfect and new is a really hard task. And if you do, oftentimes on the used side of things, you're actually going to end up overpaying for it, because you're going to pay way too much for that perfect, pristine condition, as opposed to getting one that's got a couple of minor scratches or some very small minor flaws. So the next thing to talk about when we're talking about the benefit of a new boat is the engine hours. So this is something that we can talk about on the used end as well. But generally speaking, you're getting a boat that's has no use to it. The engine is fresh. You don't have to worry about it breaking down, about mechanical issues. You're not going to have any major repair bills that are going to be hitting you anytime soon after you get a new boat. It's just the standard maintenance, standard coverage, and it's going to typically hold up really well, and you're not going to have as many issues. As well as engine technology goes along, typically you have less and less issues that end up coming up with these engines. They're also easier to service, mainly just because getting parts and getting having the expertise of people to work on them is a lot easier to find. If you go to a boat that's a fair bit older, trying to get parts for it or things like that, if you have something goes wrong, can be a little bit trickier thing to do. So now, the next thing that we can talk about as far as the difference between new and used boats is the selection. So when we talk about new boats, there's generally speaking a much broader selection available than there is on the used market. Now, this is because of two different aspects. Number one, because of what you may have as far as what's in stock and available from a dealership. The other aspect is when we start talking about custom ordering. So let's hit on both of those, but this is something that's really only available on the new end of the spectrum. Now, when we start talking about new boats, if you're looking specifically and going, hey, I want to get a red boat that's a 23 footer. Now, whether or not your dealer has that in stock, which I'll get to in just a second, you could potentially custom order it, but that is something that you can probably find. If you're looking specifically for a used boat in a 23-foot red boat, your options are going to be really, really limited, especially if you're talking about semi-late model used. Like at any given time, as an example, I'm primarily familiar with, or familiar a lot with let's back up and rewind back. So let's take that same example in a used boat and say you're looking for a red 23-footer, but you're looking for something that's, 3 to 4 years old. If you're looking for a specific brand, like let's say you're looking for a Malibu 23-footer red boat that's 3 to 4 years old, chances are there might be 1 to 3 of those available in the entire country for sale, and they may be on the opposite side of the country. Your options are just going to be a lot more limited. Where on the new end of the spectrum, you can probably get exactly what it is that you want. Whether your dealer has it or not is a question, but you also have the ability to custom order a boat. Now, here at the time frame that we're shooting this video in 2023, ordering a boat's a lot easier thing to do than it was back during 2020 or 2021. But that was kind of an oddball, unusual circumstance that happened with COVID. Now that supply chains have caught up and things are a little bit easier to come by, you're not running into that same issue anymore. It's back to normal kind of timelines, which if you're wanting to buy a new boat in July and you want to be able to use it that summer, custom building one may not necessarily be an option, but that's about it. Outside of that, if you're just about any other time of the year, other than let's say June, July, August, you can probably custom build a boat and have the ability to use it quite a bit. Even if you were to custom build one in June, oftentimes you'd be able to have it around to you in August type time frame, and you'd be able to use the boat effectively during that year. It's just a matter if you want the full summer out of it, you need to probably be looking at building a boat in March, April-ish time, something like that, so that you have the ability to custom build a boat and have it there for you at time. But that is one other advantage of new boat, is you have the ability to customize it effectively. So when you start talking about customization, we are talking about the ability to completely custom build the boat exactly to the specs that you want, with the options you want, the colors you want, things of that nature. I'm a big fan of custom building boats as long as you have the time frame to do them. If you find a boat that's exactly what you want, that's great. Go with it. Or if your timeline doesn't necessarily work out, sometimes you're kind of locked in and going, hey, custom building a boat isn't an option for you. But if it is, going through that process can be great, mainly just because you're getting exactly what you want and you're not getting anything you don't. So if you don't care about, let's say, having a stern thruster on a boat, if you have one in stock, you may or may not have one of those, that option on the boat. If you're custom building it, you can select it if you want it, or if you don't have to worry about paying for it. So that's one reason why, like at Boardco, most of the boats are brought in a specific setup so that they can have things added to them really easily. But we make it so that there's not a whole lot we have to take with that. We try not to have a lot of options that people wouldn't want on the boats, mainly just because it's really hard to take something off if a boat already has it on it, where it's a lot easier to do an upgrade to a stereo system or add a thruster system or something like that. That can be done very, very easily. So if you're looking at like any of the boats Boardco has, you're probably not going to see those things on most of the boats that are in stock, mainly just because they're really easy to add, and we want to make it so if you don't want it, you don't have to pay for it. But if you do want it, we can really easily throw it on. So, but that customization aspect is something that's obviously only available for new boats. You can't really customize a used boat. The next thing, and this one is a really important aspect that's sometimes really misunderstood, and that is dealer support. So when you buy a new boat, generally speaking, if you buy a boat in your local market, your dealer is going to you should typically do a really good job taking care of and supporting you after you buy that boat. I know at Boardco, we have it so that you bump right to the very front of the line. You get priority in our service department, ahead of people who didn't necessarily buy their boat from us, or didn't necessarily buy a new boat from us. You basically have it so that you've invested with that dealer, so they're willing to try and jump in and help and support you as much as possible. Now, as a dealer that tries to take care of all of our customers, we take care of our used boat customers as well in a similar vein. If you bought a boat from us that's used, you jump ahead of front of the line versus somebody who bought a boat in a different place. But that is something that is an important factor. Is you oftentimes will get better dealer support with a new boat than you will with a used boat. Now, one other piece to throw in there is if you buy a boat from a different area, you want to make sure, like if you live in Utah where we're at and you're looking at potentially buying a boat in another place, like let's say from Texas as an example, you can potentially buy a boat from Texas, whether that's new or used. Particularly on the new side, though, it's really important to make sure that your local dealer is plugged in and is aware and is able to take care of you and help you. For us at Boardco, if you're looking to buy a boat from us and you're in a different area, we will typically arrange that with your servicing dealer that's there close to you to make sure you get top-notch service like you bought the boat from them, even if you're buying a boat from us. So we'll communicate with that local dealer to make sure that you're taken care of really well, because we want to make sure that you have the best possible ownership experience, not just that you buy a boat from us. So that's something that's really important, though, as far as the dealer support, that you don't often get that same kind of support when we're talking about a used boat. Now, next piece to talk about when we're talking about new versus used is and this one is probably the one that is the most surprising to people. And that is that oftentimes people can get a better deal on a new boat than they can on a used one. So I'll jump into this and explain a few of the additional nuances here in just a second. But there were a lot of people that were very surprised, particularly in like 2020, 2021, 2022, when they came in and saw the pricing on new boats, even though that during that time, because of the supply chain, we were booked out further than we normally would be. They were surprised to see that sometimes new boats were selling for less than what used boats were selling for out there. In some cases, boats that were 2 to 3 years old were selling for more than what we were selling our brand new ones for. Oftentimes, people just expected the new boats to be substantially more. One thing that is different and unique when we start talking about start talking about towboats is that the depreciation schedule on towboats is very different than it is on, like, let's say, a car. So typically on a car, you're going to lose 30 to 40% of the value the day you drive it off the lot. And then on average, it'll lose another 10 to 15% in value every year after that. A boat does not depreciate anywhere near that fast. Normally, it depreciates 10 to 15% the first year that you buy the boat. And actually, the second year, it sometimes depreciates as little as 5%, sometimes even 0%. Because the depreciation year 1 to year 2 is just enough to where if you were to turn around and sell it, it will depreciate enough to where somebody would buy it versus buying a brand new one. Now, the next piece that comes into that, though, is that a boat will depreciate at about 5% a year every year after that is average. So yes, it's a depreciating asset, but it doesn't depreciate anywhere near as fast as a car does, partially because they don't wear out nearly as quickly. I mean, you can find 30-year-old boats, 40-year-old boats that are still running great, that still work fantastically well for the owners, where that's a lot harder to find with a car unless it's a classic car or rebuilt or something, where you'll find boats that are, 80s and 90s that are running the original engine and still work fantastic. So, and haven't had any major work done on them. They just hold up really well and they aren't used as much as a car is. So when we're talking about that, that's something that's a very important thing, is to understand the depreciation on a new boat versus a used boat. So oftentimes a new boat might not necessarily be less expensive than that same boat that's a year or two old, but sometimes it can be a better deal. In other words, if you have a boat that if we're using really round numbers, let's say you're looking at a new boat that's $100,000 and you find a used one that is of that similar make and model that's a year old that is $90,000. Well, you might be in the group that's going, hey, you know what? I can save $10,000. That's a great way to go. You might also be in the group that's going, hey, for the extra 10%, if I can get exactly what I want and have it be brand new and have it have full warranty coverage and all of these other benefits that we're talking about, it may be a significantly better deal to get the new boat. So that is something to keep in mind is if you are shopping for used boats, it's really important to understand what the baseline is of what that same boat is new. Now, if we're talking about boats that are 10 years old plus, that's a whole different discussion. They're obviously going to, like a 2012 is obviously going to be substantially less expensive than a 2023, but it is still just as important to get an idea of what you're comparing against. In that same discussion, it's probably a good idea to get to look at, if let's say you're looking at a Centurion, if you're looking at like a 2014, 2015 Centurion, it might not be a bad idea to understand what like a new 2023 Supreme is looking like. Because oftentimes as the technology and the other things have advanced with the boats, you can sometimes get a boat that is a superior boat that's sometimes much newer for not a whole lot more cost in that regard. So that's something to just be aware of, and that's an important thing to pay attention to, because oftentimes it can be a lot better deal on a new boat than you may think, just because it's a totally different game than what most of us are familiar with in the automotive industry. Now, the other piece that is a very important one that people are not expecting when we start talking about this, and that factors into how good of a deal it is, has to deal with the financing. Now, when we start talking about financing, if you're not going to finance your boat, this wouldn't necessarily apply as much. But if you are planning, like most people are, to finance their purchase, what ends up happening is that your financing rates and your financing terms are very different on a new boat than they are on a used boat. Now, the reason for that is because banks typically value used boats a little bit differently. They do it off of NADA book values, which are notoriously inaccurate because they're not established the same way that they are for like NADA book values for cars, which are established oftentimes off of auction information. That's not the case for boats. It's just based on a formula that they put together, and it's kind of more of a guess than it is something that's a precise science. And so because of that, the valuations can sometimes not be correct. And so you'll either end up having to put more money down on a used boat, or in many cases, you're going to end up with a higher interest rate in comparison to a new. Even if all things considered are the same, the rates on new boats are definitely lower than they are on used boats. This can mean that oftentimes you can have a used boat that's less expensive, but your payment ends up being the exact same as a new boat, and all of that additional payment is just pure interest. So really, when you look at it, it's actually a better deal in many cases to get a new boat, just because when you start looking at the financing terms, you get a much better deal on the new boat than you do on the used. So that's something that's really important. All right, now that we've covered some of that stuff with what are typically the benefits of the new boat, let's jump into the used boats and talk about why you may want to get a used boat versus a new one. So some of the stuff I've already covered in talking about the new boats in reference, but there are a few definite pieces that may be a better pick when you start talking about used. So the first one is we want to talk about the price. This is by far number one. It's probably number 1 through 7 of the reasons to buy a used boat versus a new one. Most people, if they're looking at two boats that are the exact same, one that's new, one that's used, the main reason why they'd be going with the used one versus the new one is just because of the price. So that, like I mentioned, as far as the deal structure, it sometimes can be a better deal to get a new boat. It sometimes can be a better deal to get a used boat. Now, a couple different things when we're talking about price. If we're talking about late model used stuff, this is something that's an important thing to keep in mind with all the things I mentioned previously regarding financing rates, regarding warranty coverage and other things, because not all warranties are fully transferable and things of that nature. It sometimes can be a better deal for sure to get a new boat. If you're start talking about an older used boat, that's going to be a different discussion. Like if you're looking at a used towboat that's in the $50,000 range, there's just nothing new that's even remotely close. So if that's the case, you're definitely looking at a used boat for sure, and you can save quite a bit if you go to one that's a little bit older. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about when we're talking about pricing of used boats is just how to make sure you're getting a decent deal, because this is something we see pretty regularly. I'll see people that radically overpay what they should for their boats. So the first thing is that I would recommend just looking and seeing what kind of a deal it is, like seeing if there's other comparables. This can be a little bit hard because we don't have something like an MLS system or something like that with real estate, or even like what you have with with certain aspects for cars like Kelley Blue Books or other different valuation methods. It's just a little bit more of a gut feel type of thing. And if you have any questions with this is actually something that my team does on a regular basis, is they'll advise people as to whether a boat they're looking at is a good deal or not. And they'll be fully transparent with you. You don't have to worry about them trying to sell you something or things like that. If it's a good deal, they'll definitely tell you. But sometimes that can be helpful to get a good third-party opinion. But there are other resources. You can see what else is available for sale. One of the best ones, if you're looking at a towboat space, would be like onlyinboards.com. You can also look at things like boattrader.com. Though you've got other boats that are mixed in that aren't just towboats. But you can get a little bit of an idea of what else is available in the market that's a similar make, similar model, and similar year range. The next thing is when we start talking about boats. I talked a little bit about this with condition, but if you're going to be getting a boat that's absolutely mint pristine, especially if you're talking about one that's a number of years old, sometimes that may be what you're looking for, which may be great, but you also might be notably overpaying for it. If you're the kind of person that's going to take perfect care of your stuff, that might be a decent option. Might be the only way you can get a boat that's perfect, pristine. If you're not necessarily, and you're going to probably beat it up just a tiny bit, like most people do, then getting one that's already got a few scratches or things like that might actually be a great way to save some money. I can tell you on the dealership side, it's very interesting. We can go through and have a boat listed for sale that's got some cosmetic blemishes, like a couple different seat splits along seat seams, that people just won't want to look at buying the boat, even though they're fairly minor cosmetic blemishes. And it's funny because we'll spend $1,500 fixing that up, and the boat will all of a sudden sell for $7,000 more. So if you're the kind of guy that's looking for a decent deal, look for one that's got a couple splits in the seat and cushions. Look for something that's got a little bit of wear and tear. And if that's the case, you can oftentimes fix that and take care of it yourself, and you can do it at a fraction of the cost. Part of the reason why dealers are willing to do that and aren't necessarily always wanting to get that taken care of is just because of timelines. So like we can have a boat, if we get a boat traded in June, we typically don't have time to get like seat cushions repaired or other fixes done because it can take weeks. And so what oftentimes we'll do is we'll sell it with a few of those blemishes in place and take a hit on what we'd be able to sell it for just because of the timelines. Where if you're willing to do that yourself, you can pick up a boat that's got a few blemishes on it, save a few bucks, and it can end up being a really great deal. And you can have a boat that looks even better than one that's in great condition just by refinishing it slightly. Which, as I mentioned before, when we start talking about body work and things like that, on a boat, that's not a problem at all. Gel coat's a little bit different. If it's got big gouges or things, those are a little bit more expensive to fix. But things like oxidation, which is like the cloudy look on the outside of boats, that can be very, very easy to fix. It's just basically some buffing. And it's more elbow grease and time than it is actual hard cost. So that's something you can pay somebody else to do. But if you want to do a little bit of work, if you're the kind of DIY person that wants to save a few bucks and do some work yourself, that's a great way to go. So those are some things when we start talking about price of what you can do as far as getting a used boat. If you're looking at late model used, sometimes there are great deals that are out there that are a good pick, especially if you're going to write a check or pay cash for it. If you're financing, sometimes the new boat may be a better option. And just make sure that you understand what you're looking at as to which one's the better deal. So that's the first piece. The next one is, like I mentioned before, is we'll talk about depreciation. As I said, the depreciation on a new boat is going to be less than it is on a car, but it's still going to be a bit more than what you get on a used boat. One thing that's great to know is once you get a few years out on a used boat, the depreciation has really slowed down to a trickle. So if you start talking about like a boat that's 7, 8 years old, something along those lines, it's going to depreciate from that point forward, but it's going to depreciate at a very slow rate. So if you're looking at like a 2015, 2014, 2013, something along those lines, even slightly older, the vast majority of the depreciation has basically been taken out. It's really interesting because we make the comment that like 2008 model boats are worth $50,000. So we have like 2008 Centurion Enzos. It's $50,000. It's $50,000 3 years ago. It's $50,000 7 years ago. It's going to probably be $50,000 next year. They just don't really depreciate that very much. And that's one great thing when you start talking about these boats. In fact, if you look at it, it's a very weird curve that over time it will go down in value at a slower and slower rate. And ultimately, it actually starts to tick back up. I can tell you there's boats that are in the early 2000s, in the 90s and such, that they're worth more now than they were 5 years ago. And some of that is stuff like inflation, but that happened 5 years ago. It was still the case. Boats that were in the 80s were worth more at that time than they were 5 or 10 years before that. And the reason why is just because you don't have the floor on used boats the same way that you do with cars, where they reach a point where they're worth nothing. A boat will, generally speaking, unless it's just hammered and left out in the elements, uncovered and just destroyed, unless that happens, the boat never really runs out of steam. It's continuing to be worth something forever, which is a really important thing to know. Now, there's two other things I can talk about as far as the benefits of a used boat. The first one that I want to hit on is typically the negotiation. Now, this is not always the case, but there's sometimes you may have the ability, depending on what you've got, you may have the ability to find a better deal on a used boat just because the price may be a little bit more flexible. This could particularly be the case if you're looking at something in the off season. So if you're looking in, I'll say October through January type time, you can sometimes find used boats you can get a really good deal on. If you're looking at like a dealership, sometimes in like September and that is the case, because a lot of dealers don't want to carry used inventory into the winter time, depending on what part of the country they're in. But that is something that you may have negotiation ability. That's not saying all used boats have more flexibility. In fact, a lot of the times our used boats have a less flexibility on pricing than our new boats do. But you sometimes do have some ability to do some negotiation on the used boat end, depending on what you're looking for and what there is. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. The last thing to talk about on it is, and this will only apply if you are familiar with the boat, is you can have the kinks worked out. So what I mean by that is that you have all of the boats that are built, they're hand built, custom done by hand, and they're not building large volumes of them. They're typically a very small volume product. Even if you start talking about, like, let's say Centurion boats as an example, they're building a couple thousand of them a year. So we're not talking about massive high volumes where they're building millions of these like you would see in like the auto industry. So because of that, there are certain things, because they're hand built and put together, there's certain different little kinks that some of them have, whether that be an item that's a recall issue or something that is typically dealt with warranty. Though we don't see large warranties on new boats, there is a little bit here and there. And normally, if you got a boat that's a few years old, most of those have been dealt with and handled and taken out of the boat. So that can be the case. This does tie into the first thing that we talked about, though, is the reliability of the boat and where it comes from. Because though it may have kinks worked out of it, you may, depending on what the used boat has, may have significantly more kinks in it that were put there because of misuse or because the boat was not handled properly. Or it may have been a boat that just was what you refer to as a lemon, that came from day one, that just was fraught with issues, which once in a blue moon, we see something like that happens on the new boat front, that person just really wants to turn around and sell the boat. It's kind of funny because sometimes once that happens, the boat never has an issue after that. But there are certain boats that are just fraught with issues, and most of them are because they haven't been used properly or handled the right way. They haven't been maintained. They've been abused and abused. The people are just running them very weird. I don't know how else to describe it, but there's certain individuals that seem to have a lot more problem than other individuals, even across multiple boats that they own. And it mostly has to do with just the way that they use them. So knowing the boat and not having a proper understanding of it is an important thing. And if you get the right one, it can be a really good move. So that's pretty much all I've got when we're talking about new versus used boats. I hope this has been helpful and good information. If you've got another topic you want us to talk about or discuss or want to pick my brain on, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to give you any information that can be helpful for you. We want to just be the best possible source of information when it comes to surf boats and tow boats, and be able to give you all the information you may need, whether you're looking at purchasing one or just are interested in the subject. We want to try and be the best source of information that you can find. So thanks a ton for listening. Thanks for tuning into the show here. If there's anything we can do for you at Boardco, like I said, if you want information about potential boat you may be looking at that's new or used and want some feedback or information that we might be able to help you with, just reach out to us. We're happy to. So send us a text, shoot us an email, give us a phone call. We're happy to help wherever we can. So thanks a lot. Once again, this is Mitch from Boardco. We'll see you later.